Welcome. Today I'm talking to Stephen Cavey, co-founder of Ground Labs. Ground Labs enables organisations to discover and remediate all their data across multiple types and locations, on servers, on desktops and in the cloud. The company's core focus is to develop technology to meet the increasing challenges of data management and regulatory compliance. This is shown with their flagship products, Enterprise Recon and Card Recon, along with their continued development of future solutions to address the complexities, challenges and intricacies of data discovery. Stephen, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Now, I just stated there that Ground Labs enables organisations to discover and remediate all of their data across multiple types and locations. Can you just elaborate on what this means and how it works in practice?
Absolutely. So when we talk about discovering data, think about it a little bit like antivirus software, except instead of looking for viruses, we're looking for different kinds of data that organisations typically store. We focus particularly on personal and sensitive data because in today's world, with all of the regulation that's been coming out, we're finding that organisations are collecting so much information about both their customers, their employees and other scenarios where they come into contact with large volumes of people's information, their personal information. And so the ability to find that now is becoming an essential task. And the challenge with finding it is it exists across so many locations, as you said. So we're seeing data on the endpoint, we're seeing data on the servers, in email, and now up into the cloud. And so this is where Ground Labs has developed a very specialized capability. And once we've found that data, we can help organizations to what we call remediate, which is the cleanup efforts in terms of removing the data that shouldn't be there or securing it and locking that data down so that people can't steal it.
Looking at your core offering, you speak of developing the technology to meet the increasing challenges of data management and regulatory compliance. Provide us with an example of how you would assist, let's say, a financial services organisation in this area.
Absolutely. So we're living in a world full of regulation, and depending on the industry that you come from, you may have some different types of regulation and requirements that you have to comply with. We're seeing on a country-by-country basis many different countries coming out with government-level regulations. So, for example, here in the UK, it's the UK Data Protection Act of 2018, and of course the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation that's across broader Europe. And it essentially concerns how businesses are collecting and handling personal information of individuals. And so we're seeing many different organisations from all different industries having to tackle these different types of regulation that are coming out, and they have to effectively understand where all of that data is and then start to understand whether they are in compliance with these different regulations.
Can you talk to me about some of the other sectors that you work with, how your approach differs to each different one?
Absolutely. So, banks and financial institutions, they have a very specific set of regulations that they have to comply with. But if you go more broadly to consumer-facing organisations, for example, retail, telcos, utilities, even government, they're all dealing with very similar requirements, but perhaps there's some variances in the regulation that they have to comply with. For example, a classic one that many people may have heard of is the payment card industry standard called PCI DSS. If you are in the business of taking payments where you may come into contact with the payment card, the credit card number, then you have to comply with a very specific set of regulations around how you handle and secure that data. We call it store, transmit or process. And so we're helping on a case-by-case basis different industries to protect the data that they have to be concerned with, so that again, if they are in a situation where someone attempts to steal data from them, if they were able to find that data first, lock it down and secure it, then the chances of suffering a data breach are dramatically reduced.
Managing data has become so intrinsic to businesses. What are the key things that business leaders need to consider about data privacy? Perhaps what are some of the misconceptions about it?
Yeah, it's a really great question. So I think a lot of organisations are very focused on the data regulations of the country where they are based in. But in actual fact, what we're finding is a big misconception around the breadth of laws that exist in the world. To give you an example, the UN came out and confirmed that there's now over 130 countries that have modern data privacy regulations that are coming out, and it's a constantly evolving landscape. And so if you're an organisation, say here in the UK, and you're selling globally, it's not just the laws that apply to the UK and Europe that you necessarily have to be concerned with. You also have to be aware of laws from other countries if you are collecting personal information about customers beyond your own borders. And I think this is one of the biggest misconceptions, is that if you deal with a customer in the US, for example, well, you need to understand some of the laws that apply over there, because if you did suffer, let's say, a data breach, then the requirements on how you disclose that data breach and how you notify the individuals affected will differ from country to country.
I'm curious how you manage non-technology departments, let's say HR or marketing, for example, in how best to manage data.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a really good saying here, which is that security and privacy, it's not an IT problem, it is indeed a business problem. And so that very much starts with involving the business when you're looking to build a privacy program around collecting people's data, because often it is these non-technical areas of the business that are involved in the collection and the handling of people's personal information. And so if you're treating it purely as an IT project, then you're going to miss out on a big part of the scope where the real problems exist. So I find a lot of organizations that do this well will engage all areas of the business very early on and start to understand how the business is collecting and handling and where the data is ending up that they collect from individuals. But also other things you can do is establishing what we call data stewards or data champions. So it's really about having that person in customer service that has been briefed on what the requirements are across the organisation to handle and protect people's information, and then they're passing on that knowledge, they're educating their colleagues and their peers within their part of the organisation, and they become the person to ask questions of if there's ever any uncertainty around, hey, should we be collecting this? Are we allowed to store it here? And they'll understand what the requirements and the standards are within the organisation on how personal data is to be handled.
Now, much has been spoken about the way that COVID has perhaps changed the working landscape. I'm wondering how it's changed the way that companies identify and manage data.
It's a great question. So I think the biggest change since COVID, obviously, is that everybody was sent home. And as a result, the amount of data, personal data in particular, that is being stored on the endpoints has increased dramatically. I think companies rushed to send people home, and we saw in some cases that they couldn't get stock of new laptops to issue employees. So there was a lot of employees out there working on their own devices for a period of time, and they've transitioned onto corporate devices in some cases. But a lot of IT teams have struggled to put in place the full range of controls that needed to be put in place to properly protect and manage the data and frankly, handling security more generally on those endpoints. So we've definitely seen a lot more data being handled of individuals in people's homes, and it's an organisation's responsibility to make sure that we're somehow tracking that, finding out what's ending up on those endpoints, and then doing the necessary steps to lock it down and protect it. And I think this is where data discovery plays an important role, is that it's not just something that can be done on servers and, say, in the cloud and email. It's also something that needs to be performed out on those endpoints to make sure that we don't have large amounts of customer and employee data on some individual employee's laptop because they might have been working with some files last week, or they might be in HR or whatever their job role is, where their job is to handle personal data, but now they're doing it in a home office setting. And so we're seeing that data sprawl going across the organisation to all of these employees at home. We need a way to control that, and we need a way to identify that, and we need a systematic way of cleaning that up. And this is where data discovery plays a big role.
And is this where Ground Lab comes in?
This is what Ground Labs does, yes, precisely.
Explain.
Absolutely. So Ground Labs helps organisations, large and small, to discover all of the personal and sensitive data and confidential data that exists across the organisation, whether it's up in servers, up in the cloud, on emails, sitting on those endpoints, or even in really interesting situations like very large data stores like databases and other areas like Salesforce, SaaS-based applications. There are just so many places now where an organisation is storing very sensitive, very personal, very important data, and having a single pane of glass to scan and identify where all that data is, and then be able to start to decide how to control it, and maybe even do some actions like deleting data in places where it really shouldn't exist, has become a critical function in security and privacy programs. And so this is where Ground Labs has been receiving a lot of interest from organisations to help them manage this very difficult problem And we've been doing this for many years now, since, the last 15 years.
Your enterprise recon solution is powered by glass technology. Tell me a little bit more about this technology and how it helps Ground Labs stay ahead of the curve.
Well, the glass technology is effectively a platform that can scan through a very large volume of data across many different types of locations, both structured and unstructured. And it allows you to search for many different forms of data, whether it's personal data, sensitive data, confidential data. But more importantly, it allows organizations to customize the type of data that we look for and build out requirements to their exact needs. So the sorts of requirements we might see in a telco organization compared to, say, a retailer or even a government may be very different. And so the glass technology allows us to be able to define what is sensitive and what is a very high risk in this type of organization, and then completely change those requirements when we move to a different organization, and being able to look at that data at scale across the many different repositories of data that exist, such as cloud, databases, on the endpoint, as we were mentioning before.
Let's talk about the regulatory landscape. It's changed vastly over the last couple of decades due to technological innovation and the acceleration of that. Where do you see it heading? Will it plateau or will it continue?
I don't think we've plateaued yet. I think there's been so much evolution in the world of data privacy, and there are a number of governments that are continuing to review their privacy laws even now. I think the GDPR here in Europe led the way in setting a new benchmark of where government privacy standards need to sit, and what we're seeing is that there's a lot of other countries now that are trying to align their data protection laws to effectively meet where the GDPR sits. It's a concept called adequacy without getting into it, but effectively, if you are in a situation where you're now complying with the GDPR, this is going to put you in good standing as you start to encounter other countries' data protection laws and how you have to handle the data of private citizens who hail from other countries who could very well be your customers. So definitely I don't think we've plateaued. We are seeing a lot of evolution right now, but I think in terms of dramatic changes, like do we see a whole new next generation of GDPR? No, I think if you're compliant with the GDPR as it is today, I think what we'll see from here on in may be incremental improvements to data privacy laws.
What advice can you give businesses that are trying to manage or navigate this regulatory environment? There's so many regulations out there. Where should they be focusing their efforts?
Absolutely. I mean, Ground Labs runs surveys on a regular basis to different groups of professionals, and the common theme we find is that around 70% of organizations don't seem to know where all their data is being stored. And so I think in any project or any program where you're looking to comply with privacy laws, start with the data. I think this is where so many organizations have gotten it wrong, is that they've gone through and asked the organization what we're doing with data, and you'll get all sorts of interesting answers. But effectively, if you start by identifying where all the data is in a systematic, evidence-based way, that's going to put you in a very good, strong position to then build a proper privacy program around that and secure the data that really exists, as opposed to saying, let's go ask the head of customer service where we're storing data, and based on their answers, we'll go put the controls in place. But if there was somewhere that they didn't know about, then we've completely missed controlling and securing that data. And unfortunately, this is the reason why a lot of organizations continue to suffer data breaches. It's the data that they didn't know that was being stolen from them. So if you do start with the data and then build a whole bunch of evidence around where the data is, that will put you in a very strong position to secure all the data in the organization.
Stephen Cavey, thank you so much for joining us.
It was a real pleasure. Thank you very much.